Good afternoon. I'll try not to be long because I know we're behind schedule. That was fascinating, that last discussion about undergrounding. It's not a big topic in Canada. It should be because that's where we had the big ice storm. But it got me thinking that this is a great approach we could take to the billboard issue. We don't need to get rid of them. We need to underground the billboards. Right? You could combine your campaigns into one. Every jurisdiction has a maximum height for billboards. Make it a negative number. We're not anti-billboard. Anyways, I always like to start with a stupid joke, so done, check. It's really an honor to be here. I'm from Toronto. My colleague Todd is here. We drove down here last night, or all day yesterday, 12-hour drive. We started the first Canadian affiliate of Scenic America last year, Scenic Toronto. So we assume you'll be renaming Scenic North America at some point to be more inclusive of all your affiliates. It's really exciting to see this because in Canada it really is more of a grassroots group of rabble-rousers who tend to, which is what you probably all are when you're not here dressed up all nice. But we don't have symposiums with engineers and landscape architects in very fancy places like this talking about how we treat, use, or abuse our public spaces. So I'm inspired, and I'm going to bring this energy back to Canada. So thank you, and thanks for inviting me. I've been doing this work, different types of activism, community organizing for about 15 years in Toronto, and the common theme throughout all of it has been about public spaces and how people have access to public space, how we use it. And billboards was really my entry point. I'm going to focus mostly on that. I know there's lots of topics that have been discussed today. My work has been mostly about the visual environment and the impact that has on our lives and the lack of control people have right now over the visual environment and the effect that that has on our lives. And in Toronto, it's really difficult because the lobbyists have become very, very powerful. And of all the issues you discussed today, it's the issue where the lobbyists, I think, are the strongest. There aren't a lot of lobbyists against trees or against flowers or trying to keep the power lines up to the same degree that there are lobbyists at our city hall and probably yours being funded very well by the advertising industry to convince city councilors that billboards are a necessity, they're inevitable, they give us amber alerts, they create vibrancy for our communities, and they're very effective in Toronto, and sometimes it's a losing battle. But the good news is that we have won many battles, and we win those battles when we engage citizens. When citizens are involved, when councilors hear from the lobbyists and from their constituents, they actually go with the constituents because lobbyists don't vote. And these folks want to keep their jobs, and they want to keep their pensions, and some of them actually want to be good politicians and listen to their constituents. But when they're just hearing from the lobbyists, and they're not hearing the other point of view, I almost don't blame them for putting up the billboards and allowing them. That's democracy. So really our work is about engaging, informing, and mobilizing the average citizen so their voice is being heard at our local city halls. So that's where most of these decisions are made locally. Obviously there's state legislation and here federal. I think one of our biggest obstacles is that the problem has become normalized, and someone just mentioned that a few minutes ago. People have a sense of inevitability, that billboards have always been there, it's part of the landscape, it's definitely part of the urban landscape. And I think for that reason, our movement in some ways is obscure. You know, if people are against climate change, if people are against racism, there's just some issues that everyone knows are wrong. We want to fight against that and stop it. And sometimes when I tell people that I'm working in a movement against billboards, sometimes they're like, yeah, I hate those. But usually the first response is, really? There's a movement for that? But then when I explain all the reasons why I think they're problematic, within a minute or two, they're like, yeah, I really agree. I had never thought about it in that way. I didn't know there were groups that cared about that, and where can I sign up? But their first response is often just amazement that we exist. The good news, though, is that most people deep down do have a universal hatred for billboards. There's some kind of understanding that they don't belong, that they're out of place. And there's a lot of strange pop culture references to this that pops up every now and then. For example, where am I aiming this? Probably right here. Blade Runner, This is 30 years old now, but in a lot of movies, when they want to create a really scary dystopian future, they do that by saying how big the billboards will be. And of course, now it's like, we actually have those. 30 years ago, that seemed like some strange idea that you could actually have an entire side of a building with a digital sign. And of course, we do now. But that wasn't supposed to be an idealistic future. It was supposed to be a dark, scary one. Then you've got an episode from The Simpsons, which ran exactly 20 years ago this month, the attack of the 50-foot eyesores. I don't know if you remember this. And there was this huge billboard being held up by a corporate mascot, a lard lad. And what happens in this episode is that all the corporate mascots come alive and start terrorizing the city. So it's this kind of symbolism of how they're always terrorizing us mentally, but what if they actually started terrorizing us as monsters, and they start destroying the town? And of course, the punchline is that Bart's sister Lisa talks to an advertising rep, and he just says, "Ignore them. If you ignore them, they'll go away," because they're all about gaining your attention. And if they weren't getting your attention, they wouldn't be there. And then, of course, there was the next year, 19 years ago, there was a Seinfeld episode. It's called the Chicken Roaster episode, where this huge neon sign is shining in Kramer's window, and he was so angry, and he hung a sign outside of his window saying "bad chicken" or something like that. And he protested against this Kenny Rogers, was it? Kenny Rogers roasted chicken. Anyways, it's a hilarious episode. So these things creep up in funny ways in pop culture reference, but then politically, it's really a non-issue. I mean, you don't see many politicians running on this as a key platform. Although it sounds like in Maine, Vermont, Hawaii, and Alaska, things did happen. Although those were mostly citizen-driven. But that's just 4 states out of, you have a whole bunch, 50 plus 1 or 2. We don't learn about your country and my country, but you got all those stars. You have more stars than we do. We just have a leaf. 1. So the question is, how do we tap into that? How do we tap into this reality that people do have a visceral anger and hatred towards this inappropriate use of public space, but that culturally and politically, it's kind of a non-issue, right? And I think one of the reasons it's hard for us to do that, too, is because there's a lot of different audiences and potential allies and stakeholders, and they're all coming at it from very different angles. And it's hard to create one message that appeals to all of these different groups. And I've been thinking of what are all the different groups I can reach out to in Toronto. And I'll give you a few examples. So first of all, there's those who appreciate scenic beauty. And I mean, there's a big emphasis on that here. That works rurally more, I think, for the highway issue. It doesn't work as much in the city. In fact, I'm thinking of dropping the word scenic for our Toronto group. I don't think scenic and urbanism really works in the same way that it does rurally. So I'm thinking of launching a Scenic Ontario for our province-wide association, because the advertising companies are trying to do digital signs on our highways. Right now we have none, except what they do is they find ways to get around it. They'll put them, you're not allowed to do it within half a kilometer, which means something in miles. So they'll put them half a kilometer away, but it's so big that they seem closer. Billboards are closer than they appear, or further than they appear. And then what they'll also do is just essentially attach a billboard onto a truck and just park the truck in the middle of a farm. But they're actually trying to get digital now, and they're trying to change our provincial legislation. And so I'm going to be starting Scenic Ontario for that. But anyway, so there's those. Thank you. Then there's those who care about the mental environments. And I'm glad that the word mental health has come up a few times today, and I'm going to talk about that a bit in a moment. There's urbanists who just care about cities and that, cities, the idea that cities should be unique, and that economic development happens when cities have a certain unique feel, and there's definitely a growing movement of urbanism and an understanding of how important it is, not just to keep taxes low to attract businesses, but that a certain type of city and a certain feel of city attracts investment and businesses. So there's that community. Then you've got left-leaning progressives who just hate anything corporate. Let's be honest, there's people who hate billboards because they're corporate. And then on the other side, you've got people who understand that, what was that line I just heard recently? Beauty is good for business. Right? I think there's a deep understanding that it affects property values, that from a right-wing perspective, there's lots of reasons to want to control public spaces. Then you've got spiritual and religious groups who might be concerned about not the existence or the structure existing, but the content, which we've barely touched today. Very important. What is on these billboards? You know, you can control what your kids watch on TV. You can put filters on your laptop and what they can watch on YouTube. But when you've got billboards everywhere with a bunch of images and content that you might not be comfortable with as a parent, you have no control over that. So that's an issue. Environmental groups who are just concerned about overconsumption and this constant barrage of messaging to just buy more stuff. And of course, the environmental impact of the signs themselves and the energy usage, especially on the digital signs. Then you've got schools who might be concerned about certain messages within their geographic zone. The safety groups who are concerned about the distraction of static signs that flash every 10 seconds. And a spin-off of that is insurance groups who are constantly funding campaigns telling people not to text, not to use their cell phone. Imagine getting the insurance companies on board, because we know that distraction is the leading cause of accidents in North America, more than alcohol, more than speeding. Neighborhoods who are affected, neighbors who are very close to digital signs. We shot a video recently, which is online, where we went into people's homes and filmed them talking about how the billboards behind them, which you could see flashing, has affected their ability to sleep well, for their kids to sleep well, etc. And then even amongst those groups, there's a wild variety of concerns. Some people think that it just cheapens the city. Logos and branding cheapen things. So if you buy a pair of sneakers, there'll be a logo on it. If you buy a pair of nice leather shoes for your suit, there's no logo on it. A can of Coke has a logo on the whole thing. An expensive bottle of wine has a much smaller logo on a paper label. The more expensive and the more value we attribute to things, the smaller we make the logo. You put a logo on a tube of toothpaste. You don't put a logo on an expensive couch, right? We don't put logos on our cars. Maybe a little bumper sticker on the back. Or there is a logo on cars, but it's quite small, right? So when we cover our cities with logos and wrap our buses and our subways and our streetcars and our buildings and our parks, we're cheapening the city. We're turning it into a can of pop and a tube of toothpaste. Other people are more concerned about the impact on the architectural and heritage feel of our neighborhoods. Other people might be concerned about the mental health impact, and I can't stress this enough. Most advertising campaigns are designed to achieve two goals. The first one is to make you feel bad about yourself. There's something you're missing. Your teeth aren't white enough. You should get contact lenses because your glasses are ugly. You smell bad. Your clothes aren't sexy enough, right? And the second part is, we have a product to solve your problem. But a lot of ads are about how, you know, you have bad breath. Well, we have a gum for that, right? Why would you want an industry that is committed to making us feeling like crap, doing all of our exterior decorating of our public spaces? And then on top of that, you also have issues around body image, right? And on how that affects eating disorders, et cetera. One that's close to my heart in Toronto, we pride ourselves in Toronto being a very diverse city. We say we're the most diverse city in the world. I'm sure 100 cities say that all over the place. But we're a very diverse city. Our billboards are not. All of our billboards aren't in English. Most of the models are white. They're all straight. You don't see two guys holding hands. They're all able-bodied. You won't see someone in a billboard with a hearing aid or a crutch or a wheelchair. They're all secular. No one's clearly from any religion, right? So most people look at these billboards and just don't see themselves reflected back. Their body size, their skin color, their language, their physical ability, their sexual identity isn't reflected back. I think that's a shame. I think our public spaces visually should reflect back who we are. And then lastly, another concern that's also close to my heart is, I wonder what impact it has on our sense of belonging. If I walked into your house and took down the art that you have up and put up my own art that I thought you should have in your home, you'd suddenly feel like, this is invasive, this is my home, you shouldn't be here, right? And I think because we allow corporations to put up signs everywhere, third-party advertising, it erodes our sense of collective ownership over the commons. And I think that feeds political disengagement and people's sense of isolation in their own neighborhoods. So, wow, that's a lot of messages. How do you create a slogan or a short ad or a little video that appeals to all of those different messages? And I think the answer is actually kind of micro-targeting them all separately, which is very hard to do. And I think our movement has a more complex message than a lot of other movements, and a wider breadth of stakeholders who are coming at it from different angles, and that's a challenge for us. I was asked to talk about youth a bit, so let me just mention a few things about youth. Youth really care about this issue, but again, it depends how you frame it. Do youth care about beautification of highways? No, not if you frame it that way. Do they care about the issue from other angles? Yeah, absolutely. That's when I got into it. I got into this as a youth, and a lot of my friends were very passionate about it. I'll give you a few examples. So Adbusters magazine is a magazine published out of Vancouver in Canada. It has tens of thousands of subscribers, hundreds of thousands of subscribers to their online newsletter. They were the ones who started the whole Occupy movement. They target a young audience, and it's all about, well, you can tell by the name, Adbusters, about reclaiming what they call the mental environment. And it's very popular, and it really rings true for a lot of young people. There's a guy who invented this thing called TV Be Gone. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. I have one. It's a little universal remote you can buy, and it turns off any TV anywhere. You can use it in a bar. I actually want to try it downstairs. When I walked in, there was a wall of like 10 TVs. I might walk by it later and see if it works. They'll all just go off. But people, you'll go out with friends to be social, to a cafe or restaurant, and there's a TV distracting you or distracting your colleague. And so now I have a machine where I can turn them off. So I've been buying these bulk and importing them into Canada. They're made in the States. And when I tell people about them, they're like, oh, right away. They're just like, I'll pay you anything. I would love to have one. People are hyper aware of the degree to which we're being bombarded with external messages that is slowly driving all of us crazy, either because of the content itself or just because of the volume, and we don't have a chance to think. And more advertisers are trying to capture us in a point where we're a captive audience. Because you can change the channel on a TV. You can flip the page of a magazine. But if you're stuck on the highway in traffic, you can't escape. They're putting them now in elevators, in urinals, at the gas pump, somewhere where you don't have a remote control. So to me, it's actually about democratic choice. I think advertising is okay in any context where you as an individual can choose to look at it or turn it off. And when they're taking advantage of us as a captive audience in a space that we own, that's where I think it's problematic. Another really fun campaign, this is called No Ad. This was done by some young people in New York. They created an app that works on your iPad, where if you go into the New York transit system, you hold it over all the ads in the transit system, and it transforms it and shows you art instead, in real time. It's amazing. So this is what you see. And what it does is it makes you realize how beautiful cities could be if we not only got rid of ads, but replaced them with art. And the amount of revenue these bring in for our transit systems on a large scheme, as a percentage of their full revenue, is nothing. And the amount of space we give up for it, again, to take advantage of a captive audience, is quite disturbing, in my opinion. So how do we redirect that energy of the adbusters and the people who want to turn off the TVs in the restaurants and the people who want to get ads out of the subways and combine that with this movement? Because this movement is smaller, it's older, and it's on the grand scheme, it's obscure, right? Here's a funny story. So I did a blog post recently about illegal billboards in Toronto, billboards that don't have permits at all, and there's a lot of them. And I've been fighting the billboard companies with them, and their lawyers are very effective. But people are waking up to it, and I've been getting emails of support. I got an email from one guy who was like, Dave, just send me a list of all of them. And this is a guy who used to be part of Occupy Toronto. He's like, I'll take care of them. I have some people. And they just wanted to throw paint on them or go up and do graffiti. And I met with them and I said, you know what, 20 years ago I used to do that. You'll have a momentary sense of achievement that you reclaimed a public space and altered it. But the message will be back up the next day. If you engage in the system politically and effectively and organize people and get people informed, you can actually change legislation, you can change rules, you can change bylaws, and you can get rid of these signs in a permanent way. And he was like, well, I didn't know that. I mean, that's what the whole Occupy movement represents. The Occupy movement was thousands, tens of thousands of young people who were really upset about income inequality, but didn't even occur to them that there was a political process to change that. So they just got together, in a park and try to create a whole new society. which was inspiring to know that young people care enough, but really sad that they didn't realize that they could run for office. And if they really think they represent the 99%, you'll probably do very well if you're running for office. That's a lot of votes. It's a really big percentage of the vote, even under first past the post, which is a terrible voting system. But let's not go there. So what I've learned in Toronto is that at City Hall, what happens is very often is an application goes in for a variance for a non-compliant billboard. It'll go to a subcommittee meeting, and they'll vote on them in batches, 5 or 10 at a time. And they were just rubber stamping them, saying all in favor, all opposed. And their argument was, the councillors, that, well, no one's here speaking against it. So why shouldn't we approve it? So what I started doing 10 years ago with a group called the Toronto Public Space Committee is we would organize people to show up. And the amazing thing was it didn't take a lot. 1 or 2 or 3 people saying, wait, I'd like to speak about item 27. And they're like, what? Someone wants to speak about a sign? Okay, sure. And they would say, there's a reason why this sign requires a variance. It's too big, it's too bright, we're worried about the impact it's going to have. And the opposite result started happening. It was like night and day. They started voting no, just because we showed up. And the problem is that the whole democratic process is broken. People don't know these billboards are being proposed. They don't do proper notices, and when they do notices, they're not designed well. In Toronto, they refuse to use the word billboard. If they do a notice to your door, it'll say, there's a proposal for a third-party sign, which sounds like, I don't know, it doesn't sound like anything. What does that mean? Is it a sign for a party, like a birthday party? What is a third party? I don't even know exactly. I don't know what second. I know the first party is an identifying sign. Third party is a billboard. What's the second party? Is there a fourth party? So when we use bureaucratic administrative language, people just tune it out. And I've been fighting with the city and saying, call it a billboard. And I've had meetings with the staff, and their solicitor is there, and he's like, we will not call it a billboard. It's not a technical term. And I'll say, Google billboard right now on your phone, do an image search, and you'll see that is, governments, I think, have a responsibility to use normal English, not technical terms, if they're trying to really engage people. The problem is they're not trying to engage people. We can engage people. So what I've been trying to do is to just kind of democratize the whole process. I don't think we have to ban billboards. In fact, the best comment of the day was someone up here quoted someone over there. Sorry, I don't know all of you because I'm from Toronto, and it's great to meet you all today. But the quote was that the best legislation for billboards would be, what was it, to allow any neighborhood who wants to increase visual pollution, that they should be allowed to do it. I don't think we need to ban billboards. I think we need to democratize the process, because no neighborhood in their right mind will ever agree to it. And I think we would actually come across as more credible if we weren't saying, not for highways. Highways, they should totally, I think, just be banned outright. But in cities, we come across as more credible if we're saying neighborhoods should have control over the visual environment, instead of we think that all neighborhoods should be billboard free. Who the hell are we to say that, even if we believe it in our hearts? I'm just going to wrap up by saying I think the other big obstacle for our movement is that we risk coming across as advocating for a sterile visual environment if we're not also teaming up with people who are creating beauty beyond trees and flowers. So the big movement that does exist amongst young people is beautifying cities with public art, with murals, with all these installations and interventions. And I think we need to actually combine those movements. And what I'm thinking of doing in Toronto is, instead of just saying, I want to get rid of billboards in Toronto, I want to frame it as like a makeover, right? And that's a big thing now. There's TV shows about makeovers, whether it's for your home or your body or a restaurant. Let's get rid of the billboards, but what's the new thing we're putting on? What's the new suit or the new makeup or the new hairdo? And there's lots of great ideas out there. And if we combine those together, I think it's more effective. I'll give you a few quick examples. The bus shelters in Portland don't have ads on them, at least a lot of them. They have these beautiful glass etchings on the glass, and you can see some art there on the bottom. And bus shelters in Seattle have art made by local kids, which I just think is absolutely adorable. In my neighborhood, and here's another, we all know about murals, and I don't believe murals are appropriate everywhere. You might have concerns about murals in a heritage district, for example. If a building's 100 years old and it's the original bricks, you probably don't want to put a mural on it. But most of our cities, let's be honest here, aren't heritage districts, and they're not old. We've been building out and out and out, and there's not a lot of beauty to preserve in a lot of neighborhoods in our cities. So we can't just be talking about preserving the old town and then getting rid of billboards everywhere else and planting some flowers. Let's talk about how to make our neighborhoods beautiful and team up with the groups who are already doing that. And I think that's a more powerful message. In my neighborhood, I've been working on this really fun project. This was inspired also from Portland and Seattle, where they're painting murals on the ground, on the road. I mean, the biggest canvas you have in any city is the road itself. So what they did in Portland is they started painting murals on the road without permission, and the city wanted to rip them out. The group is called Intersection Repair. The city threatened to rip out these murals, and the community was so angry because these murals were designed by local artists and painted by families and kids, and they were like, no way. So what Portland ended up doing as a city was developing a permit process where neighborhoods can come together, apply for a permit, and legally paint murals